Hello everyone and welcome to another G News update. Today we're down at Palm Beach. It's a beautiful day and it's just a bit cloudy right now, but anytime soon the sun could come out. And I'm surrounded by pretty noisy seagulls, but who's complaining? It's beautiful down here. In the news today we saw the way in which the former gun lobbyist Nicole McKee made an announcement that she was going to loosen up the regulatory burden on alcohol sales. So she'd moved away from the reduction of harm towards the reduction of the regulatory burden, which is all about making it much easier for businesses to peddle harm and harm communities with drugs. But basically, because alcohol is a very acceptable social drug, then we kind of like put aside the harm and we think about the good times. And it wasn't long ago that the former gun lobbyist was very triggered, ironically, that a cabinet paper seeking to eliminate the reduction of harm and replace it with the reduction of the regulatory burden was leaked to Radio New Zealand, and she got very upset with being held accountable for what's really going on. Now, I think that's actually quite a good story that's broken in the press today about alcohol and making it easier to get your hands on it and to actually sell it. But basically, the reason it's a good example of what's going on is we're seeing the same kind of thing on every level when it comes to basically a kind of a battle between a corporate and private property rights ownership invasion, I suppose, a takeover of New Zealand, and the Te Treaty, the concern for the environment and preserving our way of life and our natural way of living with trees and creatures in the sea. So these extractive industries and big corporations, the game is basically loosening up all of the things that protect us from the harmful effects and making it much easier to, say, put a supermarket right here on this beach, because you fast track things and you get around things like environmental concerns. You don't have to go to an environment court anymore. You just step around that. You appoint some people that are friends of yours that believe in the same things. Maybe they've got a stake in the game, but they belong to a panel. The panel then looks at the application for, putting a supermarket here, or maybe on a cemetery, or possibly even just where there's some kauri trees and some birds, so that they don't have a habitat. So you put your supermarket there, and then you say, woohoo, look, isn't that great? So as New Zealand confronts this, this is what we see right across this government. The government we've got at the moment, pretty much a libertarian, classical libertarianism, which is freedom of human flourishing for the very rich, and basically the working classes, well, they don't have any rights, or their rights are taken away from them. So yesterday we were talking about how they're not building houses, how they've only done 45 finished houses, this government, when it comes to houses that were funded in Budget 24 and Budget 25, so that's over more than a year, perhaps a year and a bit. Only 45 houses, state houses. And Nicola Willis was arguing tooth and claw that they are building more, but and they had budgeted more, but and the public service outside, her control, were doing some building. But she was just trying to get away from the fact that they'd really crashed construction last year. There'd been a massive slump. All those jobs had gone. And we've seen a deterioration in, the standards of living in New Zealand. The cost of living had gone crazy, and the growth wasn't there that had been promised. So everything that Nicola Willis had said is under threat. And there's a kind of a con job going on, a confidence game where you see all those facts, you see all the people are suffering, you acknowledge that they are doing it tough out there, sort of in an abstract way, and you perform. You do some dressing up, you put on a costume, or you come out and you say, look how busy we are, and then you kind of use some kind of uncertainty as if it was certainty, and say, well, look, Costco, for example, they're now going to consider going all over New Zealand as a result of our fine and incredible initiatives. So this was kind of like what we saw yesterday. Nicola Willis said, look, I'm going to make a series of announcements at 2:00. And sure enough, she showed up. And the next thing you know, we were listening to Nicola Willis explaining that some changes to legislation were coming up in November, that this was based on an RFI that consulted those people who were interested within the supermarket sector, and that she couldn't tell us who they were because transparency wasn't as important as commercial confidentiality when it suited her. But she also mentioned that there was one at least example of a supermarket, I think it's probably Woolworths, who it took about 4 years for them to get through all of the planning and consenting. And so the job then was to suggest that that's the case for all the consents without anyone seeing any of the evidence about, was there a consenting problem. Now, they did the same trick over in electricity. Remember how there were all these consented wind farms just lying around while gentailers didn't invest in renewables because they said, well, the market's not ready. We've got to wait for the market. And we've got to look for a market-led approach. We've got to wait for there to be a demand before we do anything about renewables. And then shortly after that, they start saying, well, look, the gas has run out. And some people tried to blame an offshore ban on oil and gas exploration. But as we know, that wouldn't have really affected anything now. Again, it was a spurious argument. So we see these spurious arguments, the decline of the exploration, they hadn't really found anything for, since about 2014, I think, and it was all on its way out. It was a sunset industry, fossil fuels. But we saw when it came to donations and stuff like that, this government, Christopher Luxon and the ACT Party, kind of getting around these big fossil fuel providers, and Shane Jones all over the coal thing. They want donations to keep their parties going, so they've got hold of fossil fuels and they built up some spurious arguments. So why am I saying all this? Because all those spurious arguments about fast-track consenting were actually there when it came to many of these projects like wind farms. Consenting wasn't the problem. So is it true that when it came to supermarkets that consenting was a problem? Well, it turns out that some of the biggest supermarket chains in the world, they were not interested, they didn't participate in the RFI. They just didn't want to come this far to New Zealand and set up shop, even if it was easier. And Costco wasn't saying anything certain. They were saying, well, look, we'll consider the possibility of expanding, but we'd been considering that possibility for months now. You can see back in July they talked about doing this. That didn't stop Chris Bishop from going out there today on his Facebook page and going, thanks to our expressway free fast track consenting, Costco are now considering expanding across New Zealand. Bravo, thank you, we are the greatest. And it's this kind of salesmanship that's not very true. It's kind of taking an extreme and kind of making out that it's a certainty, like an uncertainty is a certainty, or that a 4-year wait is the norm when it comes to supermarket consents. So I guess the criticism that was made about yesterday's announcements by Nicola Willis boiled down to the way in which it's all inconsequential. It's not actually going to help anybody today. It's not going to help you in the next couple of months. And even if there were more supermarkets, it's probable that there's a big if all over it. Whether it actually brings down prices remains to be seen. There are other factors involved, as you know. So it's not really concrete. It's not really a solution. It's certainly not an intervention. It's a maybe, possibly one day there could be somewhere down the track some kind of downward cost pressure because there's more competitors here. But what we did see is that there were record profits made by foodstuffs, and we saw that there was a bit of soft corruption. This is what looks like soft corruption anyway. These are the words used by Robert McCulloch in his writings about what we're seeing with Stephen Joyce and the NZ Initiative and the likes of Nicola Willis, whose father, James, used to be a Bell Gully colleague of Roger Partridge, who chairs the New Zealand Initiative. As you know, the New Zealand Initiative is a member of the Atlas Network, just like the Taxpayers Union is in New Zealand. And those two think tanks have a tremendous amount of influence in our lawmaking and in our politics. And we see them surfacing. They'll write an article about how the Reserve Bank needs to do this or that. It needs to lower the bank capital limits. You'll see a spat in public, between Roger Partridge from the New Zealand Initiative, and you'll see Adrian Orr fighting him and saying, your arguments don't make sense. You'll see information like lobbyists going to Nicola Willis and pleading the case to lower those bank limits. And then, hey presto, along comes Nicola Willis with Treasury, who looks like it's been stacked these days to have a more libertarian, active party values type view of responsible fiscal management, real diehard sort of Ruth Richardson people who believe in neoliberalism on sticks in Treasury, going along, meeting with good friend of the National Party, Neil Quigley, who's the chair of the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, and kind of pulling the rug under Adrian Orr so that he's enraged. I mean, people know he had a bit of a short fuse emotionally. He's probably a very sensitive and intelligent man. So they knew that if they could say, look, Neil's on our side now, we've managed to get to him, and he's on our side like he was on Stephen Joyce's side when it came to a medical school. There are a million reasons why Stephen Joyce did well out of that contract. And so this is a friend of the National Party who was pulling favours over there, saying, well, look, I'm not doing that here. I absolutely don't have a conflict of interest, but I've changed my mind all of a sudden after some attention from Nicola. And here's Treasury saying that you don't need that money, Adrian. You don't need that money to operate like you were counting on after you did everything right and saved all that money and brought inflation down. Now we're going to pull the rug on you. And having Willis in front of you sneering and kind of provoking you, he probably lost his cool, and said a few things that were probably deserved, about the situation. And it came out today that, as it turned out, there'd been a bit of conversation about how Neil, friend of Stephen Joyce and the National Party, had written a letter to Adrian after this blow-up over bank capital limits, which Stephen was now, Neil was now, probably on the side of, as well as pulling the rug on Adrian's funding. Basically Adrian's like, well, I'll tell you what, mate, I will resign, but on the condition that you withdraw a letter that you wrote me, which detailed matters concerning that meeting, and how I lost my cool. Understandably, it's a human emotion. When somebody abuses you or betrays you, you get a bit angry. I mean, we all do it, don't we? But not Adrian. Adrian's not allowed to do that. So he said, look, I'll resign if you withdraw this letter. Then Neil Quigley went out there and said, he did it for his own personal reasons and didn't tell us the truth. But all this has eventually caught up with him, and it's caught up with Nicola Willis, who is dodging and dancing around all of this. And in the background is the New Zealand Initiative. So let's talk about them. The New Zealand Initiative, as I said, that was a place where Nicola Willis was a director between early 2016 and early 2017. And she basically went pretty much straight from being a New Zealand Initiative think tank director on the board into politics. And a few years later, she turns up as the Minister of Finance. And we see these things suddenly start to happen that are actually totally aligned with what the New Zealand Initiative wants the government to do. And so that's where there's a perception of soft corruption. And this is the kind of thing that is mentioned by people that are concerned with what's going on with lobbyists and our loose control and protections over lobbyists and our government in New Zealand, which, you know, is pretty slack really compared to other countries. So we start to see these kind of games being played. Now, it just turned out that both the members of the big supermarket duopoly actually have members on the board at the New Zealand Initiative. That's the think tank that I'm just talking about, where Roger Partridge is the boss. But you've got Scott Perkins and you've got Chris from Foodstuffs, and they're on the board there together with Barbara and a few others, and Roger, who is good friends with James, and James is Nicola's dad. So James and Roger, good mates from Bell Gully, working 25 years together as colleagues. So it's all pretty tight. And then you've got the situation where you see Stephen Joyce writing as chairman of NZME. Before he became chairman, I believe, he wrote an article in April that kind of said, look, why don't we have a market-led solution? Why don't Woolworths and Foodstuffs from, you know, the New Zealand Initiative here get their act together and preempt something that could be, crafted to look like Nicola did it. So I don't think Stephen said that, but that's basically what's going on. So ultimately, out of all this, you would get the situation where you have a market-led solution that Davey Boy likes. Private property rights are seen not to be trampled on, but the market led the solution, proving once again that a free market is perfect and it's the way to go, and you don't need any socialists interrupting. The free market will solve everything. But really what's happening is you've got this lobbying influence in the background going on and all these relationships. And suddenly, you've got this idea that instead of a duopoly, we could have a Atlas triopoly. You know, we could have Foodstuffs split themselves up, and in return, they could get something out of it. And what they could get out of it is expansion into the South Island, which the Commerce Commission had blocked. But let's just say, if you can overturn the Reserve Bank by maybe getting rid of a person and then prevailing on the acting governor and the chairman, who's your friend, then what's to say you can't do the same kind of thing when it comes to other sectors? So that's what we're sort of looking at here is the Commerce Commission. Will it kind of up and, start singing the same tune as the New Zealand Initiative soon? Will this idea that Nicola Willis mentioned yesterday, that they're doing a cost-benefit analysis of structural change, and that means breaking up the supermarket duopoly, will that be preempted by this kind of like secret plan, which is to bring in the market-led solution just before Nicola does this? She signals it, she says, I'm going to make an announcement about it, and then suddenly out comes Stephen Joyce's ideas that were published in April. So I think we're sort of seeing this kind of game playing, we're seeing this, and it's all about loosening up regulations at the end of the day for a corporate takeover, so that at the same time as we're kind of like feathering the nest of these people that are clustered around the NZ Initiative, the NZ Initiative is asking for direct foreign investment. So we're seeing the Overseas Investment Act being dismantled or loosened up, timeframes reduced, scrutiny reduced. And this is all you'll find in a coalition agreement from the ACT Party, who basically are very tied in with what the NZ Initiative and Atlas are doing. You've seen how ACT is very tightly connected to the Atlas network, and you've seen Davey Boy say, well, we're nothing to do with it. You've seen it sort of mocked as a big conspiracy on Q&A. But here's the facts, and this is how it really works. It's this kind of soft influence and political parties, doing the will of the think tanks behind them. And this is nothing new. This is actually just what happens with lobbying. It's been happening in the UK. They had 14 years of governments. They get to control media organisations. They get to control these big sectors like electricity, so that there isn't any investment for years and years in renewables. And there's a kind of a favouring for fossil fuels. There's all these kind of outcomes. So it's all the same stuff. There's a kind of a war on the indigenous with neoliberalism, and you're seeing it in New Zealand unfolding all the time. So that's the context that we've got. And we see it in the Jen Taylors, who are members of the NZ Initiative. They have people on the board. You see it with the banks who are getting all sorts of spin-offs. You've got this the latest that lowering of the capital limits means something like $7 billion to the banks. It means that smaller banks can enter here, but we're also selling off things as fast as possible, like Kiwibank, and it'll be a two-step operation. We're privatizing our public health. We're shrinking government. This is all part of neoliberal ACT Party thinking. And we've also got these supermarket prices. So you know what it was like about 10 years ago when you spent $350 at a supermarket. Well, you could easily kind of like live on that for a month. That would be way too much for everybody in a small family to get through. But now it's just a small trolley, full of a few bags. That's money's all gone. And who's making money? Well, they're gouging you. And this is kind of through this the soft power, the soft corruption, the cozy relationships. So we've got cozy relationships in energy. We've got cozy relationships in the supermarkets. We've got cozy relationships in retail banking. And we've got people like Joyce suddenly moving in and becoming a director of foodstuffs with his ideas and his knowledge, much like we saw with the Waikato University. And we're seeing things like the last-minute changes to things. Suddenly, a piece of law that may have been agreed to somewhat along the way suddenly changes just before it's going to become law, with a whole lot of NZ first conditions, like out here in the Hauraki Gulf, where, suddenly you want to do some commercial fishing in the high protection zones to undermine the entire intent, or many other examples like that, bad lawmaking, last-minute changes, and, our politicians on the left saying, well, we wouldn't support it after that. But those stories never being headlines, never being in the news. It's all Christopher Luxon and his growth initiatives. It's all Nicola Willis and her supermarket announcements and her big shake-ups. What a shake-up it is, and that's kind of a dynamic way of, a positive way of looking at her. So she's getting things done. She's a woman of action. She's really doing things. She's doing all she can, said Atlas Luke this morning in the Post. So, yeah, you've got that that whole thing where media, have their favourites. They're on a side. They're not on the side of Labour. They're not on the side of the Greens. They, roll their eyes at any evidence-based ideas about things like capital gains taxes. They're helping with sort of false narratives around raising the age of superannuation. They're not really addressing the fact that the Cullen Fund keeps those costs down in the future, that, sort of overcooking and overstating the case for change. So these newspapers are kind of part of the problem. They're trying to sell to the public, to bring the public along with the Atlas Network think tank ideas, which have their tentacles into our government right now. So it's these kind of stories and this kind of thing that's happening that I think, at first people think, oh, you're a crazy person. But if you look at all the facts around these matters, increasingly people are waking up to the way that this isn't crazy. It's not a conspiracy. It's just normal, really. It's out in the open. It's there it is. It's right in front of us. And you've got Atlas saying, well, we don't have anything to do. It may be our partners, which are all the affiliated think tanks like, the New Zealand Initiative having undue influence. So we really have this kind of problem going on in New Zealand. It's kind of like a soft corruption, and I spoke about it this morning. And I just think, when you continue to see this kind of thing happening on many, many fronts, what you're seeing is deregulation. You're seeing a kind of a squeezing of the people, when it comes to their money and what they can afford. And you're seeing, what's close to austerity for some people, because, they're punching down on people. That little bit of money that you've got left, they're coming for it. Louise Upston's finding ways to make it harder if you're really struggling, and take that money off you and take that support away. And if you're really down on, a housing, you're in an emergency, maybe you're on the street and you're not very well, maybe you're a pregnant woman, well, the rejection of your application to WINZ, that's the the chances of that happening is now 385% more likely, because that's how much rejections have gone up under this kind of thinking, under this kind of cruel government that doesn't have any empathy. So this is the government that National Party people continue to vote for and support. And National Party people, National Party parents and sons and daughters, they support the cruelty, and they think it's a very good idea. But it clearly isn't the National Party of old. There's no empathy here. This is someone from an Atlas Network think tank in control of the purse strings, implementing old-fashioned neoliberalism. You've got a treasury that's looking stacked full of those people now. All these appointments look pretty dodgy. And they're singing from the same hymn sheet. You saw that Treasury Insights briefing, which is riddled full of errors and issues. You can see that it didn't make sense when you go back through the other Treasury reports. Treasury and people that were, or people advising Grant Robertson, they were very close to what Treasury had to say, and they've been in the news recently pointing out how the recent Treasury Insights briefing is wrong, doesn't really tell the whole story about COVID. When it came to inflation, this party, this performative party that's getting dressed up in clothes and doing these announcements because its growth plan has failed for New Zealand, are desperate, and they're just pretending and trying to sell you stuff. Remember when they sold you that $250 tax cut before the election? Remember when they were trying to sell us this foreign buyers tax? Then they were trying to, they're about to try and sell our houses off to wealthy foreigners with Erica. They've been basically telling us that all these people would get family boosts, but it turned into family flop. Not one person can be found that got the $250. It was supposed to be 21,000 people got helped by family boost, but only, I think that was families or households actually, 21,000. But only 153 families actually did end up getting that assistance. So Nicola Willis and their promises and their performances, there's sort of a big gap between that and what's actually delivered. There's also a massive difference between the way the press would hold Labour to account for the smallest thing. But when these things happen, we don't hear much from Audrey Young. We don't hear too much, criticism of them from people like Mike Hosking or Thomas Coughlan. Hosking will just criticise someone like Luxkin for not going far enough. So earlier in the week, we saw that whole drama about the way in which Christopher Luxon should have gone to the Reserve Bank, and he should have just told them what to do. And he should have said 50 basis points, mate. That's the deal. I need that right now. We need to get this country going. This is the kind of thing that Hosking's all about, right? That this was about strength and a strong man, and that we need this strong man leader. And Christopher Luxon, he's the man now because he did this. Wow, he could just be the guy. So all of that kind of rubbishy, kind of like macho bullshit thing, that might appeal to some men out there. A lot of men support the ACT Party because it all makes common sense. If you actually don't understand that wider harm that's going on with the reducing the regulatory burden. So, the simplistic way of looking at all of this. I was quite heartened the other day when, might have been today actually, when Peter Kay, who's a G News reader, he's the guy that was wearing the G News t-shirt the other day, said that he'd been sitting on a beach much like this, and he talked to a man who had voted for the National Party and saw his t-shirt that said one-term government. And after 5 minutes of talking about collective responsibility just versus being individual and selfish, the guy had actually shifted his way of thinking. And so that's what we could be doing, is having those kind of conversations, wearing our one-term government t-shirts or our G News gear. So it's the kind of thing that does make me feel good. I also want to thank Jan for sending me those pens. I do write everything down on paper before I type. And I'd run out of pens, and Jan kind of like asked the question and sent those to me today. So thank you very much for your generosity. When it comes to us, we're carrying on. Vicky still doesn't have a job, but we're going to introduce some more t-shirts and just carry on through this. So there's a Koha appeal today. If you can help G News to keep us going, then thank you very much for any help you can be to us. Recently, we've done a lot of podcasts with politicians, people from the Labour Party generally. I'm keen to do some more. I want to speak to the Green Party and Te Pāti Māori. If you guys want to talk to me, let me know, put your hand up. Happy to just keep people hearing from our MPs. I don't think we're hearing enough from the left bloc MPs, on the New Zealand Herald web pages. We're not hearing enough at the Post. Certainly don't hear enough of them really on Radio New Zealand. So people are having to go to social media. You'll hear from them in places like BHN and G News and possibly Paul the other one. And there are some shows around that have these guys, but the more the merrier. The more we can educate ourselves, the more we can be informed, and the better conversations we can have with everybody else out there. So that's all from me today. Basically, it's Thursday, and I'm hoping that you guys can help us out a bit here. And it's going to rain any minute again, so I'm going to have to get back to the G Newsmobile. Thank you very much for your ongoing support, and let's make this a one-term government. Vote them out, New Zealand. See you guys all again soon.
Welcome to G News, the good news.